and the Commissioner will be answering your questions after their initial statements. Please give your name. The Commissioner hasn't got much time with us, so we can't accept all questions, but the Secretary of State will meet you again at the end of the meeting. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. It was a pleasure to share this informal ministerial meeting with other ministers. We had some very interesting points on our agenda, and the main aim of our meeting was to provide the Commission with the input of the ministers so as to address some of the most important files that we have to deal with. First point was economic security. Basing ourselves on the communication tabled by the Commission and the High Representative, last June, we had a very interesting debate on the proportionality and the detail that these instruments need. We need a proper mapping, which is based on a risk assessment, which is vital for our economic security. We need to make better use of the tools that we already have and see if we need new tools to have, I don't know, investment monitoring and surveillance. The Spanish presidency is fully committed to the objective of boosting our economic security, reduce our vulnerabilities, and use our instruments as best as possible, but at the same time not affect the economic openness of the Union, because it's vital to diversify our market, make sure it's still attractive, and also allows us to have access to raw materials and resources that we need for our industry to make progress. The second point that we dealt with was the state of negotiations with in the three agreements with India. The first is the free trade agreement. The second is the investment protection agreement and geographical indications. From these are of strategic importance. Recently, progress has been made at a political level in these negotiations with India, so we feel it is vital for us now to reinforce the negotiations. The member states today showed enormous interest in continuing these negotiations as long as the results are significant enough, because we need access to the real market, but at the same time we need to safeguard the fundamental values of the EU's trade policy. I'd like to give the floor to the Commissioner and just mention that at the next session of our meeting, where we will have a working luncheon, we will look at the other trade dossiers, some which are still pending, some which are very close to conclusion. So the Presidency wants to focus on the free trade agreements and association agreements with our partners in Latin America, Mexico and Chile in particular, as well as the association agreement with Mercosur. Thank you.
Thank you very much, the Secretary of State. I was indeed very happy to take part of today's meeting. Unfortunately, EVP Dombrovskis had to attend the EU-US summit in Washington, D.C., and it is my pleasure to represent the Commission. First, I would like to extend again my sincere thanks for the very warm hospitality of the Spanish presidency. And we started the meeting with a very interesting and useful exchange on the related aspects of trade to economic security. There was a shared view. I was pleased to hear the shared view of the Member States of the importance that trade policy plays for the economic security in Europe, and we all agreed that we have to continue identifying risks, evaluating them, and seeing how best to mitigate them. We also agreed that our focus needs to be on de-risking our interdependencies, that create problems, for example, especially when we're dependent on a single supplier. Our partnerships with third countries also play a crucial role in facilitating this de-risking. We continue to do so through the World Trade Organization or through bilateral trade agreements or other forms of agreements with our partners. At the same time, though, we need to have the tools to protect ourselves of those areas where we see the specific risks. And we will continue to work on the way forward on our initiatives on export controls, on foreign direct investment screening, and on outbound investment, taking into account the possible impacts on ensuring that they provide proportionate responses. We also had an extensive discussion on the negotiations with India. We all agree that we find ourselves in a geopolitical moment in which the conclusion with India for the agreement would be extremely important, both for the EU and for their side. And we see a window of opportunity to conclude the negotiations before the end of this Commission. Of course, our lunch, you will continue the discussions on how to advance on the bilateral trade agenda, but this was very much in brief what we discussed. Thank you.
Jorge Valero with Bloomberg. Question for the Commissioner, for the Secretary of State. For the Commissioner, I would like to know what is the conclusion you got from the debate discussion on the economic security part, especially more in concrete on the outbound investment, whether you see enough consensus among member states to move forward on this dossier. And for the Secretary of State, un poco viendo el fallo que ha habido,
the failure of the negotiations with the US on steel, is that going to be discussed? And what do the member states think about the inflexibility of the US? I don't know if you're going to discuss Mercosur, but do you think that there might be an agreement with Mercosur by the beginning of December, or are there still too many significant obstacles to overcome?
Thank you for this important question. Indeed, this current challenging environment requires a comprehensive and proactive response, in which trade agreements obviously play a key role. I believe openness must remain because it contributes to make our businesses grow, to become more competitive, more resilient. We already have one of the greatest networks of free trade agreements globally, and we must continue to push for this bilateral trade agenda. We already mentioned India. Over lunch, the ministers will discuss the agreements we want to conclude swiftly with Australia, with Mexico, with Mercosur, and we hope also that the Council will act quickly on the agreements with Kenya and Chile. In the same time, I believe we should no longer be naive and address our dependencies and start the de-risking process. On outbound investment, concretely, we are at an early stage. And our position should be based on data, on evidence, in an in-depth risk analysis, and the approach should be proportionate, precise, to avoid overburdening our administrations and businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I merely wanted to pick up on this point of outward investment. I think that was the criterion that most member states highlighted. We needed to look further into the impact that such an instrument could have, and we need to have a better awareness of existing tools that are being used by other trade partners. But all colleagues said that we need an important mapping of the risks. So any measures that are drawn up from now on. We are fully aware of where the vulnerabilities are. We need to be very accurate about what its impact could be. And as the Commissioner said, we need to keep in mind not only the impact on the internal market, but we also need to look at the investment of European companies abroad. So these new instruments need to be proportionate, they need to be precise, and we need to see what kind of impact there'll be. We have to be able to measure this, and also we need to be consistent with our overall trade policy. And the fundamental approach being that the EU should remain as an open market. Now, as to outbound investment, I think all these instruments need to be thought of a bit more. Now, as to sustainable steel and aluminium agreement, well, there is a summit between the EU and the US today, and we hope that we'll be able to reach a solution. But the solution has got to be sophisticated enough. It's going to be complex, we all know that. But if you look at the declaration there, we could include a reference to all the progress that has been made over the last 2 years, and we have made progress. And we've also had recent progress made. A lot of information has been provided as to what kind of agreement we want to reach. And it is our intention to try and reach a solution by the end of the year. So our aim is to wrap up the agreement with the US by the end of December this year, which would lead to the definitive elimination of the 232 section tariffs. At the moment we have a temporary solution, but in the long term we want this agreement to be a sound one and allow us to tackle the issue of excess capacity in the production of steel and aluminium, and will also lead to decarbonization of the industry. Well, we have to wrap up the press conference with that. Thank you. Oh, yes, and Mercosur. Well, we are going to be discussing Mercosur over lunch, and we will have a review of all other outstanding agreements, but certainly we'll be looking at all our relations with Latin America. For Mercosur in particular, we are keen to know what the opinion of the various member states will be on the progress that has been made. Progress has speeded up recently, especially on the additional joint instrument. So the presidency is optimistic, and I think the political will is quite clear at the very highest political level. And a lot of progress has been made, but now we need to actually put this into action, but action that is measurable and applicable. Measures for to combat deforestation, sustainability is important. So hopefully we can make some progress with this agreement. So perhaps we can comment on this after lunch as well. Okay, so now we conclude this press conference.